In this video, we're going to be going over the methodology to get all of the Pavlov VR game modes working in your map. Here you can see that I have an example map set up. Nothing is merged or finalized or everything because I'm still working on it, but it does not have any of the Pavlov specific things in it. So we're going to use this as an example to go through the map. First thing that we're going to do is get a Pavlov Gamelogic in here and set that to our definition. I'm going to create a folder called Pavlov to kind of keep all of the Pavlov related things organized. So for the first game mode, we're going to do deathmatch. We need some Pavlov spawns. Let's put them in a deathmatch folder. For team ID, 0 is blue team or defenders, 1 is red team or attackers, or for deathmatch, we want any team to spawn at this location. Not going to worry about the other settings, we're just going to get these spawns. This is the direction that the player spawns in, so we want to put these in a situation where they're not facing a wall. It's not fun facing a wall and not good practice to do that. At the time of recording, the maximum community server player count for Pavlov is 24, so we're going to want at least 24 of these. I'm just holding Alt and then clicking and dragging to move them around. It does not particularly matter if they're floating a little bit above your level. You don't want them high up because then players will fall when they spawn. But what you can do is hit end, and that will lower the capsule down to the exact height of the mesh. So I'm just going to go around and put 24 at least deathmatch spawns. It's probably recommended to do more like 48. So you can just kind of go around and put deathmatch spawns. It's not good to have players spawn on the level because then you risk them falling under the map. You want to pull it up and then hit end to drop them onto the correct height. Alright, so I've gone through and added a bunch of deathmatch spawns. Obviously, you should take better care in orienting them and getting the heights proper and all that in your map. This is just an example on how the logic works. But we have these spawns in. Now we need a navigation mesh. To do this, we add a nav mesh bounds volume, and then we expand it so that it covers the floor of wherever we want players to be able to walk. This allows the bots to move around. If you hit P, you can visualize it, and you'll notice that it doesn't go right up against the mesh. There's a little bit of clearance. Sometimes in narrow walkways, probably there's one over here somewhere, or I can just make one. See, you could have a doorway that the bots would not be able to go from here to here. They don't understand that this is different. So in that situation, you need to add a link proxy. And this basically just connects this little bit to this little bit, and it tells them to go. You can go from here to here and cut through this even though there's no nav mesh bounds volume. This also comes into play on something like stairs, where you want players or bots to be able to get up on top of a raised elevation. You would need to add a bounds link proxy to connect this little upper bit to this little lower bit. Otherwise, bots will never make that connection and never go anywhere. So you can do something like that to connect them if the capsules overlap, which it kind of looks like they do. So now a bot could be able to go from here up the stairs to there. And that is all you need for deathmatch. For gun game, all you need is the deathmatch spawn set up correctly and a nav mesh, and both bots and players can use the gun game mode. For ZWV, the built-in zombies wave mode, you just need deathmatch spawns and the nav mesh set up properly, and you get zombies configured. For World War II gun game, you just need the deathmatch spawns and nav mesh set up, and that game mode will work fine. For One in the Chamber, you just need the deathmatch spawns and nav mesh, and bots and players can use that game mode. For Infection, you just need the deathmatch spawns and the nav mesh. For Hide, you just need the deathmatch spawns and nav mesh. And for TTT, you just need the deathmatch spawns and nav mesh. For the TDM game mode, some maps you don't want TDM players to spawn all over the place. You want one side to always spawn blue team and one side to always spawn red team. If that's the case, you can set a Pavlov spawn down and then set the team ID to 0 in this case and select only team. And now only the blue team will spawn at this location. And you can set a whole wall of blue TDM players that would all spawn on this side of the map. And if you want red to spawn on the other side of the map, you just change this to 1, and then you can do the same thing. King of the Hill has a objective. Now you can not do anything for King of the Hill, and it will find suitable spots randomly on the nav mesh to spawn these objectives, but it is good practice to put the objective proxy kind of in an area that makes sense for players to fight over. So here's kind of an open area. I'm going to leave enabled can spawn loot crate, and I'm going to drop in a couple of objective proxies where I think it would make sense to have an objective. So in this map, we have one kind of in the castle, one in the courtyard, and then one kind of out here in the village. For the settings, you do not need to drop this in. You can leave the defaults, but if you would like to change this to random order, it makes the next objective random instead of going to the farthest one away from that location. I think that's a nice thing to do. You can also change the ammo types if you want. Limited specials probably okay, or boxless. I like boxless. And you can adjust the score to win. I'd probably bump this down to 200 or so. 300 kind of makes King of the Hill go for a while. But you can also not do anything for King of the Hill, and as long as you have DM spawns and nav mesh, you'll do fine. For search and destroy, we need search and destroy spawns. So I'm going to have one side be the attacking side. I'm going to change the ID to 1 and use the special. Now, search and destroy spawns are unique in that it's not just everyone spawning on this capsule. There's actually, here, if I move it, you can kind of see it. There's actually a layer of about 10 or so spawns that spawns to the right of the capsule. So keep in mind when placing this that you don't like put this spawn next to a wall or something, because then you would have players spawn in the mesh. you want to make sure this is out to the open to the right of the arrow, and that's where players will spawn. This is the attacking team. We're going to need a defending team. I'm going to drag in a spawn, rotate it a little bit, select special, and you can kind of wiggle it around to see that it makes sense where it's located, that it's not going to spawn somebody in a wall. Next, we need the bomb objective, the Pavlov bomb spot. It is typically good practice to put this at about eye height. So if we say this is the objective, we want to blow up the statue. I'm going to grab a mannequin to see kind of how tall a player is going to be. See, this is too tall. If we put it too low, players will have to bend down in VR to plant, and that's kind of a pain in the butt. So we kind of want it about that high. That's kind of a comfortable plant height. So we're going to call this A, and then for our other objective, let's say it's here, and we want to make sure it's the correct height. Something like that. And we want to change this to B. So we have an A and a B objective. And also make sure that bots can actually reach the plant site. Otherwise, you'll be stuck with a map that people can't play offline. Next, we will do push. For push, there is a bomb objective. I'm just going to use this as the same location for S&D and push. We have our objective ID markers, and you can see what ID it starts at. I'm going to call this 0 and have this be objective A. We can adjust the explosion and explosion radius. I'm going to drop this down to 30 seconds instead of 60. And for the other site, I'm going to do the same thing. I am going to set this to 0 and call it B. In some maps, you would have layered objective groups. So if this map was a lot larger, you would have A and B. Then once players blow it up, you would proceed to C and D, and then E and F. And if you have a really large map, you would just then start back over at A and loop through it again. And you could keep going for as long as you want. But for this example, we're just going to have two objectives, A and B, on the same objective set, so they will both be active at the same time. I'm going to drop in my push settings. In this settings, we can see starting tickets for attackers and defenders. Typically, I like to use defender tickets. You don't have to. If you put -1, there won't be a max. When a team blows up an objective, they get a boost of tickets. So you can set that here. You can also set what skin you would like the push settings to use. In this example, it's the German skin and the World War II US skin. And we can choose to use World War II or modern items. I'm going to have this map be modern. So I'm going to change this from German to NATO. And from attackers, I'm going to call this Russians, because I believe that is the Steam ID for the modern Russian. For grace period, this is the amount of time that it takes between objectives. So if you have two objectives in the next objective set, there would be 5 seconds but after these are exploded for just a pause, and then the next objective set would begin. And the locker refresh time is related to the loadout room. I'm going to drop this down to 5 seconds. For the push spawns, this is kind of similar to TDM, where we have a team ID and an objective ID. For defenders, the ID is 0. So this side is the defenders in my map. So I'm going to place a bunch of defender spawns. For attackers, I'm going to drop some push spawns here, orient them correctly, and then set the team ID to 1 and drop them around the map. If you had multiple objectives, you could then set the objective set for 2. So after the objective set 0 blows up, people wouldn't spawn way back at their original spawn point. They would spawn appropriate at a closer distance to the active objective set. The loadout proxy is where you set what the push players will have available to spawn with. I'm going to add 2 indexes. I'm going to call this Soldier 1. These are like classes that players can select in the spawn menu. I'm going to call this AK-47 is the item ID for their primary hand. As a secondary, I'm going to give them a M9. Spawn with default attachments. In the knife slot, I'm going to give them a medkit. You can optionally give them grenades. I'm not going to do that. You can have them spawn with meds in a syringe, or if you want a landmine, you can also set armor and health, give them a helmet, and set the max players with loadout. This is something you want to do if you have a class with a rocket launcher or something like that. You only want like 1 or 2 players to have a rocket launcher, otherwise everyone would get it and then spam rocket launchers and ruin the experience. So I'm going to set this to 99 for this because I don't care how many players has an AK-47. And for Soldier 2 class, I'm going to give them a, let's give them an LMG. And for secondary, I'll give them an M9. And you can go through, excuse me, and configure whatever classes would be fun. You could model this off of Battlefield and have like the assault, medic, and support like that. You could come up with your own. The armor, you want 100%, and helmets, if you want to give them that, don't do like 1 or something, or they'll have hardly any armor. It's based off like a percentage system, and I don't care how many people have this. So now we have a loadout proxy, and we need to select our team ID. If we want the attackers to spawn with, say, Russian-themed guns, like AKs and stuff like that, we would then set the attackers to that and give all of these classes AKs. And then we would duplicate this and set it to 0 and give, excuse me, all the defenders M4s or things like that. For this map, I don't care if both attacking and defending use the same theme class. So I'm going to set the team ID to -1. So both attackers and defenders will use this loadout. Now when people join the push map, they will have the choice between Soldier 1 and Soldier 2, either an AK or an LMG. Another thing that is necessary is a Pavlov out-of-bounds volume. This is very helpful for preventing spawn camping, especially in push, but it can be relevant for other modes. We are going to set the volume here so it encompasses, this is the attacking team spawn. So we are going to say the allowed ID is 1. and we are going to set the objective ID to 0, so that is only active on the push game mode during objective 0. If you set it to -1, it will be active all the time, and you could have an area of your map that is only accessible for the blue team for whatever reason, if you wanted it in other game modes like TDM or something like that. What you would do if you would have multiple objective sets is that you would deactivate the out of bounds volume. Say you would set this to 1, so set this to 0. So after the objective set 0 is destroyed and it proceeds to objective set 1 after it, this would be deactivated and the attacking team could pass through here. As it is in this map, I'm going to set the allowed team ID to 0 so that it will always be active, that players with the team ID of 0 are allowed here and 1 are not. And if they enter it, they will receive a little warning saying get back to the battlefield and have to turn around or the game will kill them. Now, Prop Hunt is a game mode that utilizes the deathmatch spawns, but players can select and become props and try and hide as an object. The way we do this is we select a prop that we want players to be able to become and go down to tags and add the text PH prop. On this prop, it's already been done. And you go around to all of your little meshes and set the tag that you would like players to become it. For example, I don't want players to become this fence, but if I did, I would set this to PH prop, and then in the prop on game mode, you could walk up and become a fence. Now, it adds to draw calls to have all of these items separate. It is typically good map making conduct to merge all of these meshes so that you have a lot less draw calls and better performance. If that's the case and all these are merged, you can't simply select it and set PH prop, otherwise the player would become like the whole mountain range or something when they become a prop. The way this is handled is with a prop volume. Say this is merged, but we want players to be able to become this object, we add a prop volume over this object that players can walk up to and grab, and this allows us to set the prop redirect. We can do this by going to our prop and then selecting this asset in our UGC folder. And now whenever somebody grabs this volume, it would make them a well. So you can have this over the mesh so they know what they would become, and they can press grab on their controller and they would become this object. There are some other things you can do if you need to mesh with scaling or material override. If the asset in your UGC doesn't match the scaling in the level, if this was, say, 2x bigger, for example, you would want to go in to your volume and change the prop scale to 2x so that it matches whatever your object is in the level. So to do a quick recap, we support deathmatch and a whole bunch of game modes by adding Pavlov spawns at the appropriate way and adding a nav mesh. You can do TDM with the same thing, except specifying only team if you want one area of the map to always spawn blue team, for example. You can support King of the Hill by dropping in objective proxies and the settings. You can support push by setting out of bounds volumes so you can protect spawn areas adding push spawns with the appropriate objective and team ID, add push settings and either leave it default or configure it, add a loadout proxy and set up your loadout, and set the bomb objectives with the appropriate objective ID, marker, and any other settings you want to change. We supported S&D by putting in the bomb plant spots as well as the push spawns, making sure that they weren't in a wall. And we supported prop hunt by either setting the tag to say phprop, or if your level is merged, adding a prop hunt volume and redirecting that mesh to the asset in your UGC folder. And just like that, you can support all 14 at the time of recording Pavlov game modes. If you have questions about this, the place to ask is the workshop channel of either the Arctic VR Discord or the Pavlov Discord, both of which will be linked below.